I never thought the day would come when I'd be sitting across from my own mother, with two lawyers glaring at me like I was the villain in my own story. But there I was, gripping a folder of legal documents, fighting the urge to laugh. They really thought I'd just sign everything away? Let me rewind. My name's Jason. I'm 29 now. I lost my dad last year to a heart attack, fast, cruel, and way too soon. One minute we were on the phone, planning a fishing trip to British Columbia. The next I was identifying his body at the hospital. Grief doesn't hit like a truck. It creeps in like fog. Quiet, then suffocating. And amidst that fog was my mom, Elaine. Let's just say we never had a hallmark mother-son relationship. She was the kind of woman who always knew how to twist a compliment into an insult. You look nice for someone who doesn't care about style. That kind of energy. Manipulative. Self-obsessed. Always the victim in her own version of events. My parents split when I was 12, and honestly, it was the best decision my dad ever made for himself. He was finally free. He spent the next decade rebuilding his life. He got a modest place near the coast, joined a local fishing club, and most importantly, he gave me something I never had with my mom, space to just be me. He left everything to me when he passed. Everything. His house, savings, a few investments, his car, even the boat we never got to use. He'd told me once over a drink, Elaine's gonna come for this. Be ready, kid. At the time, I thought he was being dramatic. Turns out, he was being generous. I wasn't even a week into grieving when the calls started. First, it was soft. Hey, sweetheart, just checking in. How are you holding up? That fake concern that barely concealed the real motive. Then came the guilt. If it weren't for me, your dad wouldn't have been able to raise you right. And finally, the demands. You need to share that money. Your siblings deserve their part too. By siblings, she meant her 2 kids with her new husband, Greg. She married him 2 years after dumping dad, and they had twins, Jesse and Mark. I never really bonded with them. They were too busy pretending our dad didn't exist. I told her no, firm, repeatedly. That's when she switched tactics. She'd show up at my house, pounding on the door, sobbing into the ring cam. Jesse left voicemail novels about how I was destroying the family. Mark sent a string of passive-aggressive texts. It's not about the money, bro. It's about what's fair. Sure, Mark. Whatever helps you sleep. Then came the invitation. A family meeting, she called it. No explanation, just a time, a date, and a reminder to be reasonable. That should have been my red flag. My family doesn't do meetings. They do drama. Yelling in parking lots, silent treatments at birthdays, the whole menu. But something told me I needed to show up. Curiosity? Gut instinct? Or maybe I just wanted to see how far they were willing to go. I showed up at her house wearing my dad's old watch like armor. The moment I stepped in, I knew I'd walked into a setup. The living room was rearranged like a courtroom drama. Greg was in a suit he never wore suits. Jesse and Mark were seated like smug little chess pieces. And across from them, 2 guys in gray blazers, legal pads already open. No hugs, no greetings. Just, Jason, thank you for coming. We're here to discuss a fair division of your father's assets. They handed me a document thick, like a phone book. I skimmed. My stomach turned. They wanted 75% of everything. The house, the car, even my dad's fishing gear. I looked up, stunned. My mom had the nerve to look serene, like this was a spa appointment. This is the best thing for everyone, she said. You don't need all of it. Oh, but it got better. Greg leaned forward, playing the peacemaker. Think of this as a fresh start, son. We can all move on. I folded the document and tossed it on the coffee table. Funny, I said. I brought someone too. Right on cue, the front door opened. In walked Adam, my lawyer. But not just any lawyer. My dad's lawyer. The guy who drafted the will. The one who knew every line, clause, and defense against exactly this kind of ambush. The room shifted. Mom's jaw twitched. Greg leaned back. Jesse whispered something to Mark. The lawyer straightened like someone had fired a warning shot. Adam walked in like he'd been waiting for this. He picked up their contract, skimmed it, and smiled like he was reading a child's crayon manifesto. This is cute, he said. Illegal, but cute. The silence was thick. One of their lawyers cleared his throat, already sweating. We just think given the family circumstances, a redistribution. Adam cut him off. The will is ironclad. Any attempt to pressure my client into signing away his inheritance will be considered attempted fraud, and if you move forward with this, we'll file a formal complaint and press charges." Elaine's voice cracked through the silence. "You wouldn't sue your own mother." I met her gaze. "Try me." She blinked like she didn't recognize me. Maybe she didn't. Maybe for the first time, I wasn't the obedient son she could guilt trip and mold. Maybe she was finally seeing me as someone who wouldn't fold. Greg tried to shift the tone. "There's no need for hostility. Let's be adults." Adam smiled. "We are. That's why we're leaving. And by the way," he reached into his bag and pulled out a file. "This is a cease and desist. Any more contact, any more manipulation, any more stunts like this, and we pursue criminal charges." He slid the folder across the table like a final chess move. My mom didn't reach for it. Neither did her lawyers. Jesse's smug face had evaporated. Mark was biting his lip like he finally realized they'd backed the wrong horse. That should have been the end. But as Adam and I stood to leave, my mom looked up and gave me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Take care of that house, sweetheart. You never know when accidents happen." And just like that, every hair on my arm stood on end. The second I closed the door behind me that day, I knew something was off. Not just because of what she said, but how she said it. That smile. That calm, almost casual throwaway comment, "You never know when accidents happen." It wasn't a warning. It was a promise. I tried to tell myself I was overthinking it, that she was just bluffing, but my gut wouldn't shut up. That voice in the back of my head kept whispering, "You're not safe, and neither is the house." At that point, I hadn't moved in yet. Too many memories, too much emotion tied to the place. My dad's coffee mug still sat by the sink. His jacket hung by the front door. Walking through it felt like visiting a museum of a life that stopped too soon. I was planning to renovate it slowly, live there once I was ready. But now I had a whole new reason to check in. The next morning, I drove out early. I wasn't expecting anything to be wrong. I hoped I was wrong. But at the moment I pulled up, my stomach turned to stone. The front door wide open, not cracked, not ajar, wide open. I'd locked it. I double-checked every time. I just sat there for a moment in the driveway, staring, trying to piece together a logical excuse. Wind? A faulty lock? A neighbor? But no, I knew. I stepped inside cautiously. What greeted me was a gut punch. The place was torn apart, couch cushions slashed, drawers yanked open and dumped onto the floor. My dad's old record player in pieces on the kitchen tile. Even the framed photo of us at the lake, the last picture we ever took together, shattered on the ground. And then, the final insult, across the living room wall, sprayed in blood-red paint, one word: thief. Just that. Nothing else. Like they wanted me to stand there, look at it, and feel something. Shame? Fear? Regret? If that was the goal, they failed. I felt anger, cold and clear. I didn't even have to guess who did it. There was only one group of people with that level of entitlement and spite. But I called the police anyway. They arrived fast, asked questions, took photos. One of them, Officer Darnell, was polite but clearly skeptical. "No cameras?" he asked. "No neighbors who saw anything?" I shook my head. "This wasn't a robbery," I told him. "Nothing was taken. This was personal." He gave a slow nod but didn't look convinced. Without evidence, there wasn't much they could do. They filed the report and left with a vague promise to follow up. I stood in the middle of the wreckage after they were gone, surrounded by broken things and broken memories, and realized something important. If I didn't get ahead of this, they'd do it again. Worse. Next time, they wouldn't stop at vandalism. So I did the only thing that made sense. I fortified. I installed cameras. Not the cheap ones you buy at gas stations either. I called a friend who worked in private security and told him I needed coverage every angle, every blind spot. He set up motion-activated cameras with infrared night vision, cloud storage, live alerts, the works. Front yard, back alley, garage, even the inside hallway. I turned that house into Fort Knox. And then I waited. For days, nothing happened. I started to think maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe that one attack was it. Maybe they'd realized I wasn't backing down. But 4 nights later, my phone buzzed at 2:37 a.m. motion detected. Backyard. I sat up in bed, heart already racing, and opened the app. What I saw made my blood run cold. There she was, my mother, dressed in black like some cliché from a low-budget thriller, creeping through the backyard with a flashlight. And beside her, Greg, holding a red gas can. I stared at the screen, not blinking, not breathing. For a second, I didn't believe it. But there it was. Live. Real. My mother, who used to read me bedtime stories and kiss my forehead, was about to burn down my house. My dad's house. The one thing he left me that still felt like him. I hit record. Then I hit 911. The dispatcher answered fast. I gave my name, my address, and said the words I never thought I'd say. My mom and her husband are trying to set my house on fire. The dispatcher kept me on the line, asking for updates as sirens screamed in the distance. On the screen, I saw Greg unscrew the cap of the canister. My mom pointed toward the porch, guiding him, like this was some home project. Then she handed him something, a lighter. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I saw their faces. Focused, determined. No hesitation. And then, headlights cut across the yard. The cops had arrived. They panicked. My mom grabbed the canister, yanked it back, and they both took off running, but they didn't get far. Officers tackled them just before they hit the street. I watched it all play out live, my mouth dry, my pulse hammering. It felt surreal, like I was watching a movie, but it wasn't. This was my life now. I got in my car and drove to the house. By the time I arrived, both of them were handcuffed and being shoved into separate squad cars. My mom caught sight of me and went feral. "You set me up!" she screamed. "You did this!" I stood there, staring, feeling nothing. Not hate, not satisfaction, just a dull, heavy silence. "No," I said, my voice low. "You did this to yourself." That was the last time I saw her in person. But the fallout was just beginning. Over the next few days, my phone blew up with calls and messages from every direction. Jessie, suddenly concerned, left a voicemail with all the crocodile tears she could muster. I had no idea Mom was going to do something like that. "I'm so sorry, Jace. Please don't cut us out. We're still family." I didn't answer. Mark, who once called my dad a washed-up loser in front of me, sent a one-liner. "Didn't know they'd go that far. Hope you're good." I didn't reply. If they thought a couple of weak apologies were enough to undo the months of manipulation, the constant guilt trips, the blatant disrespect toward the man who raised me, then they were even more deluded than I thought. Meanwhile, the police built the case. The footage from my cameras became the center of it all. Crystal clear, time-stamped, indisputable. They didn't just plan arson, they attempted it, with intent. And they were caught in the act. The charges came fast: attempted arson, conspiracy to commit a felony, trespassing, vandalism, the list kept growing. And because my mom already had financial issues, debt collectors circling, multiple bounce checks, the judge denied her bail. Greg, too. They would sit in jail until their trial. And that's when it really hit me. They were willing to go to prison rather than let me keep what my dad gave me. It wasn't just about the money, it was about control. About punishing me for standing my ground. About trying to rewrite the narrative and cast themselves as victims in a story they created. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. Because what happened at the trial, that's when everything changed. That's when the truth was dragged into the light, and my mother Elaine would finally lose the one thing she valued more than money: her image. The first court date felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold through a dusty window. I sat there in the cold, sterile courtroom, dressed in a suit I hadn't worn since my dad's funeral, facing the woman who gave birth to me but never quite acted like a mother. She wouldn't look at me, not directly. Her hands were clasped too tightly in her lap, and the tension in her jaw looked permanent. Greg sat beside her, stone-faced, trying to look unfazed, like he wasn't caught red-handed on camera holding a can of gasoline and a lighter in my backyard at 2:37 a.m. The courtroom buzzed with low conversation, shuffling papers, the occasional cough. But beneath it all was this weight, this pressure that made it hard to breathe. I didn't want revenge. Not really. I just wanted peace. But the only way to get it now was to drag every dirty piece of this story into the light. The prosecution didn't hold back. They led with the footage. My lawyer loaded the video from the night of the attempted arson onto the court's monitor and played it in full, no edits. no commentary, just the cold, hard truth. The room fell completely silent as the screen flickered to life. My mom creeping around the backyard, whispering to Greg, pointing out where to pour the fuel. Greg kneeling down near the back steps, unscrewing the gas canister, glancing over his shoulder like he knew how wrong this was. Then the moment the handoff, my mom passing him the lighter like she was giving him a pen, not a weapon. Even without sound, the intent was unmistakable. The jurors watched with wide eyes, some glancing at each other. My mother's attorney shifted in his seat, probably rethinking his entire career choice. My mom didn't flinch, but I saw the tiny tremble in her lip, the way her shoulders pulled tighter with every frame. And Greg, that fool, kept his arms crossed like this was all just one big misunderstanding. Her defense strategy was laughable. At first, they claimed she was simply concerned about the property, that she'd come by to check on the place because she'd heard I'd left it unattended. Then, when that started to fall apart under the weight of literal surveillance footage, they pivoted. Suddenly, I was the manipulator. I had, according to them, orchestrated the entire thing. Set traps, planted the gasoline, used digital editing to make it look like they were planning something sinister. They called me vindictive, said I was angry about my childhood, trying to punish my mother for her past mistakes. That theory didn't just collapse, it exploded. Because I hadn't just brought video. I had years of texts, voicemails, and legal documents. I had her voice on record demanding access to the inheritance, her long-winded guilt trips, her attempts to pressure me into signing away my father's legacy. Every manipulative message, every entitled rant, every threat was organized in neat little folders my lawyer handed over like birthday presents. Then came the witness testimonies. Officer Darnell, the one who responded to the break-in, detailed the condition of the house after the first incident. Broken furniture, sprayed paint on the walls, framed photos smashed. Nothing stolen, just destroyed. His words painted the scene with brutal clarity. It was emotional vandalism, he said. It wasn't about theft. It was about intimidation. The judge nodded along. You could feel the energy shift. The room wasn't just listening anymore, they were absorbing, understanding, seeing who she really was. My mom's attorney scrambled to regain footing, called Greg to the stand. That was a mistake, because under cross-examination, he cracked. Not all at once, but slowly, like a leak in a pipe that builds until it bursts. He stumbled over details, got the timeline wrong, contradicted his own earlier statements. And then, when asked directly why they brought gasoline to a property that wasn't theirs, he paused too long. The silence was heavier than any answer he could have given. Finally, he said, "We panicked." It wasn't supposed to go that far. His voice was small, defeated. My mother shot him a glare sharp enough to cut glass, but it was over. Whatever slim chance they had of walking away was gone the moment he said that. After that, it was just a matter of time. The trial lasted 6 days. On the 7th, the jury returned with their verdict. Guilty, on all counts. Attempted arson, conspiracy, trespassing, destruction of property. The judge was swift. 10 years for my mother, 12 for Greg. No possibility of parole for the first 5. They didn't take it well. Greg slumped forward, like someone had cut the strings holding him up. My mom stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on a point above the judge's head, like she could mentally teleport herself out of the courtroom if she just focused hard enough. When they cuffed her again and led her out, she didn't look at me, didn't say a word. I didn't expect her to. What do you say after trying to burn your own son's life to the ground? The aftermath came fast. Local news picked up the story. It spread like wildfire, ironically enough. Neighbors who'd always smiled politely from across the street started crossing over to shake my hand. One guy even brought me a casserole. People love a redemption arc, especially when it comes with courtroom footage and betrayal drama. But that wasn't what I felt. Not victory, not vindication, just emptiness. I'd protected what my father left me. I'd stopped them from taking it. But the cost of doing that was permanent. You don't come back from this. There's no holiday dinner after you put your mother behind bars. No, let's move on family barbecue after attempted arson. I wasn't mourning her. I was mourning the version of me that still hoped she'd change. I went back to the house that night. My house now. The locks had been changed again. The cameras still ran silently. watching every corner. I walked through each room, checking, not for intruders, but for memory, for pain, for shadows of everything this house had held and lost. And when I reached the living room, I saw it. The wall where the word thief had once been painted was freshly redone. I'd had it repainted after the vandalism, but this time I noticed something else. The photo, that same lake picture, I had it restored and reframed. And now it sat on the mantel, perfectly centered. My dad in his windbreaker, holding a fish too small to brag about, but smiling like he'd won the lottery just for being with me. That was the moment it hit me. This house wasn't just mine because of a will. It was mine because I fought for it, protected it, preserved it. I didn't want to be the guy who had to defend his father's memory with court documents and security footage. But maybe that's what real love looks like sometimes. Quiet, steady, unshaken by even the loudest betrayal. My half-siblings never called again. Jesse unfollowed me on everything. Mark tried one last time, sent an email this time. Something long and rambling about how he hoped we could all move on eventually. I archived it without replying. Some stories don't need sequels. Some people don't deserve second chapters. And yet, part of me wonders if they ever sit with it. The silence. The fact that everything they tried to take ended up burning them instead. Not literally, thank God, but symbolically? Absolutely. They tried to steal peace and ended up losing everything. My mother cared so much about appearances. And now? Her mugshot is the first thing that pops up when you Google her name. Poetic in a way. Like my dad said once, karma's like a fishing line. You never know when it's going to pull back, but it always does. After the trial, the silence didn't come all at once, it trickled in. First, the text stopped, then the missed calls. Eventually, even the guilt-laced voicemails from my half-sister vanished into nothing. It was like everyone involved in trying to tear my life apart suddenly realized I wasn't the weak link after all. They didn't win, and they didn't know how to exist without control. I wasn't sure what to feel. Relief, maybe. Or just the absence of pressure for the first time in years. No more games, no more backhanded comments dressed as concern, no more having to explain why my father's last wishes actually mattered. The legal chaos might have ended, but the emotional rubble? That took time to dig through. I kept waking up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, half expecting a window to shatter or another threat to be scrawled across the walls. It's strange how your body doesn't know when the danger is over. It just keeps flinching, just in case. I started sleeping at the house again. Not because I felt ready, but because it was mine, and I was tired of letting fear have the final word. I replaced the broken door, installed floodlights around the perimeter, added more cameras not out of paranoia, but out of principle. This place wasn't just a house anymore. It was a line in the sand. Every time I turned a key, every time I stepped through the doorway, it was like telling them without saying a word, you don't get to touch this. I kept my routine simple. Mornings with coffee on the back porch, evenings spent fixing what had been damaged. I repaired the scratches on the wooden banister with careful hands. Repainted the kitchen cabinets my mom had once mocked for being outdated. I left them the same color soft gray, my dad's favorite. I even found one of his old shirts tucked in a drawer upstairs, still smelling faintly like his cologne. And instead of crying, I just sat with it for a while, grounded by the fact that something good had lasted. Most people think revenge ends in a courtroom, but what they don't see is the quiet war that follows. The part where you're left alone with everything you saved, trying to figure out how to live in it again without looking over your shoulder. I had to rebuild trust with my own sense of safety. I started seeing a therapist, a soft-spoken guy named Drew who listened more than he spoke. During our first session, I told him I felt like I'd been living in a fire that never quite went out. He didn't judge, just nodded and said, "That makes sense. When someone tries to burn down your world, it takes time to believe the smoke is gone." I saw him once a week, sometimes twice when the dreams got bad. I didn't talk to anyone from that side of the family after the trial. No cousins, no uncles, not even old neighbors who used to ask about my mom like she was still part of the picture. I let it all die quietly. I wasn't interested in convincing anyone of anything anymore. People believe what's convenient, and for too long, I let myself be the scapegoat for their denial. Let them whisper, let them wonder. The truth is, in the court record, and the footage stored in a cloud account, with 3 backup copies, I didn't need closure from people who were willing to watch me get devoured if it meant they got a bigger slice of something they never earned. I gave up trying to explain myself and focused on the life that was waiting beneath all the wreckage. I started working again. Freelance web design from home. Same job I had before, but this time with a sense of control I hadn't felt in years. No more checking my phone mid-meeting to see if another fake emergency was blowing up my voicemail. No more defending boundaries that should have been respected from the start. Slowly, I carved out peace where there had once been chaos. I picked up hobbies I'd abandoned, biking down the coast, fishing at the nearby pier. I even started volunteering once a week at a local youth center, teaching coding to kids who reminded me a lot of myself at that age, quiet, cautious, hopeful beneath all the armor. I didn't talk about what happened. Not with them. Not in detail. Some stories aren't meant for retelling, they're meant for burying once you've learned the lesson. But every so often, I'd catch a flash of recognition in the eyes of one of those kids, and I'd wonder how many of them were going home to the same kind of emotional minefield I grew up in. I never said it out loud, but I hoped my presence there gave them something to hold on to, that they'd see you can survive being betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you. That healing doesn't have to be loud or dramatic, it can be quiet and still, and yours alone. About 3 months after the sentencing, I got a letter. Handwritten, no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It was from my mother. I stared at it for a full hour before I opened it. Inside were 5 pages of emotional manipulation disguised as apology. No mention of the gasoline, no admission of guilt. Just lines like, I was just trying to do what was right for the family, and you'll understand someday when you have your own kids. As if love and ownership were the same thing. As if trying to erase my father's legacy was ever an act of care. I didn't write back. I folded the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and locked it in the safe alongside the court documents and will. Not out of sentiment, but out of memory. A reminder of how far I'd come and how far I wasn't willing to fall again. There's a myth that healing means forgiveness, that peace requires reconciliation. But I don't believe that anymore. Forgiveness without accountability isn't healing, it's erasure. I didn't need my mother's remorse. I needed her absence. And for once in my life, I finally had it. I planted a small garden out back, just beyond the porch where she tried to burn everything down. Tomatoes, peppers, a few sunflowers. Something about watching things grow in that space made it easier to breathe. Life reclaiming what hate tried to destroy. One morning, while watering the plants, I caught my reflection in the window. I looked older. Not worn out, just more defined. Like someone who'd been through a storm and made it out with more than scars. I saw my dad in my eyes, in the way I stood, in the stillness I'd learned to carry. That was the moment I knew I was going to be okay. Not because justice had been served. Not because the house was still standing, but because I was. Still here. Still whole. Still me. It was a Wednesday when the key arrived. No note, no explanation, just a small brass key in a plain envelope with my name handwritten across the front. There was no postmark. Someone had dropped it off directly, which narrowed the list of suspects to exactly no one because I didn't speak to anyone anymore. At least not from the circle of people who might have known what this key was for. I turned it over in my hand, studying the shape, the weight of it, the way it didn't belong to anything I currently owned. For a moment, I thought maybe it was some kind of trick, some leftover loose end from the whole mess with my mother and Greg, but even they weren't that subtle. If they wanted to send a message, it came with gasoline or guilt, not anonymous envelopes and mystery keys. Still, something about it felt intentional, familiar even. I dropped it in my pocket and didn't think about it again until the next morning, when I was reorganizing my dad's old filing cabinet in the garage. The cabinet had been sitting untouched since the day I moved in, a clunky gray thing full of tax returns, user manuals from appliances we no longer owned, and receipts dating back to when I was in middle school. I almost tossed it all, assuming there was nothing left to find, until I opened the bottom drawer and found a small black notebook wedged into the back corner. It wasn't labeled, just plain leather, worn along the edges like it had been handled often. I flipped it open and saw my dad's handwriting, unmistakable, blocky, all caps, neatly spaced. At the top of the first page, if you're reading this, you probably need answers more than comfort. That stopped me cold. I sat down right there on the dusty floor of the garage, legs crossed like a kid at story time, and turned the page. The notebook wasn't long 20, maybe 25 pages in total, but it changed everything. It wasn't a journal. It was more like a map, a story told in fragments, in carefully written thoughts and reflections and instructions. My dad had known, not just that my mother would come for the house or the money, but that she would keep pushing even after she lost. He hadn't left the will ironclad just for legal protection. He'd done it because he didn't trust her with the truth. And the truth, as it turned out, had been locked away. The notebook mentioned a storage unit, an old one under his name at a facility just outside the city. Unit 1113 key required. Nothing digital, nothing traceable. He'd paid it 5 years in advance in cash. The key had been left with a friend of his, an old fishing buddy named Pete, who was instructed to deliver it only if something went wrong. I hadn't heard Pete's name in years. I vaguely remembered him from cookouts, the guy with the laugh that shook his whole chest and a beard that looked like it had its own zip code. I guess after the trial, Pete decided the time had come. The next day, I drove out to the storage facility, key in hand, notebook on the passenger seat like a compass. The place was unremarkable chain-link fence, gravel driveway, rows of units with rusted locks and fading numbers. I found Unit 1113 near the back, tucked behind a row of broken-down trailers. The key slid in smooth, like it had been waiting for me. I held my breath and pulled the door open. Inside wasn't what I expected. There were no secrets in sealed envelopes, no hidden bank accounts or dramatic revelations. Just boxes, carefully labeled, stacked with precision. 1989, photos, 1993, letters, Dad's tools, Jason, elementary, and at the very top, a small safe with a yellow sticky note taped to it that said, "This one's for the end." I spent hours in that unit, looking through old photo albums I'd never seen before, reading letters my dad had written but never sent, flipping through report cards and art projects he'd kept for reasons I would never understand until I saw them again. There were Polaroids of me with my first bike, pictures of fishing trips we never took but planned religiously every summer. There was even a birthday card I'd made him when I was 6, taped to the inside of a box lid. I sat on the concrete floor and cried in a way I hadn't allowed myself to since the day I chose to fight instead of fold. It was like finding pieces of him I didn't know were still alive. Then, finally, I turned to the safe. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a toolbox, but heavy. I entered the combination written in the back of the notebook and heard the soft click of it unlocking. Inside was a stack of papers, neatly organized. On top was a letter addressed to me, my full name written in that same blocky handwriting. I opened it slowly. It started the way my dad always started anything serious, with directness. If you're reading this, it means things went how I feared. And if they did, I'm sorry. Not because I didn't prepare, but because I couldn't do more while I was here. The letter wasn't long, but every line hit like a wave. He talked about knowing who Elaine had become, about watching her twist people and narratives to get what she wanted, about the guilt he carried for letting me grow up caught in the crossfire. And then he wrote something that hit deeper than anything else. I didn't leave you all this because I wanted you to be rich. I left it because I wanted you to have power. The power to walk away, to build, to stay safe. You've always been stronger than you think. Don't let anyone make you smaller than you are. I reread that line maybe a dozen times. Folded the letter, placed it back in the safe, locked it again. I didn't need to keep carrying it around. I already felt it inside me. I took one more look around the unit. I didn't take everything, just a few photos, a couple of letters, a fishing reel I remembered him using when I was a kid. The rest could wait. On the drive home, the sun was setting behind me, casting the road in that golden end-of-the-world glow that makes everything feel cinematic. I thought about legacy, about what we leave behind and what gets lost. My mother tried to steal his legacy from me, burn it down, replace it with guilt and obligation. But she failed, not because I outmaneuvered her, but because my dad never let her erase the parts of him that mattered. He saved them, stored them, passed them on in a language only I could read. That night, I walked back into the house with something I hadn't had in a long time: clarity. I went to the living room, set the photos on the mantle, next to the restored frame of our last picture together. I hung the fishing reel above the window facing the backyard. A small, silent reminder that what we build in love outlasts even the worst attempts to destroy it. I didn't tell anyone about the storage unit. Not because it was a secret, but because it wasn't for them. It was for me. For peace, for closure, for a kind of inheritance that can't be measured in dollars or deeds. Life didn't shift overnight. There was no grand moment where everything suddenly made sense or clicked into place. Instead, it was small things that began to change. The way I no longer checked the front door twice before bed. How I walked through the house without bracing for something to be broken. The quiet had stopped feeling like absence and started sounding like peace. It took time to realize that safety for me wasn't just about locks and alarms. It was about not waiting for the next betrayal, about finally trusting that the war was over. I spent most days rebuilding what mattered, not just the house, though that was part of it, but the version of myself I'd pushed aside during the chaos. The part that laughed at dumb movies, made breakfast at noon, picked up a book without checking his phone every 10 minutes. It felt like discovering someone I'd lost and learning how to let him live again. There were still shadows, of course. Grief doesn't disappear, it just learns to walk beside you. Some days, I missed my dad so sharply it felt like breathing glass. A song on the radio, the scent of pine after it rained, a random memory like him teaching me how to fix a squeaky door with nothing but a butter knife. Those were the moments that hit hardest. Not because they were sad, but because they were full. Proof that he'd been here, that he mattered, and that he hadn't been erased, no matter how hard some people had tried. I got a letter from the prison about 6 months after the trial. Not from my mother directly, but from her legal rep, a request. She wanted to speak to me, just once, in person. No cameras, no lawyers, just a conversation. I held the letter for a long time before setting it down. Didn't shred it, didn't respond, just left it there on the kitchen table like it might answer itself if I stared hard enough. For a brief second, I considered it, not out of curiosity or forgiveness, just a part of me that still wanted to ask why it was never enough, why she saw me as a bank account instead of a son. But I already knew the answer. Some people don't want to love you, they want to own you. And when they can't, they destroy what they think should belong to them. That meeting wasn't about closure. It was about control. One last attempt to rewrite the story, and I wasn't giving her that. The real last word had already been written, not by her, by me. Every day I woke up and lived without fear was a sentence she couldn't erase. Every moment I smiled without guilt. Every plan I made for the future. Every meal I cooked in the kitchen, she tried to reduce to ash. That was my answer. The truth is, I didn't need to confront her, because I'd already done the harder thing. I'd let go. Not just of her, but of the idea that she would ever be someone else. I stopped waiting for the apology that would never come. Stopped replaying old fights in my head, imagining different outcomes. I stopped writing her into my future. And that, more than anything, is how I knew I'd finally healed. Not because I got justice, not because the law was on my side, but because I chose to move on without dragging her with me. I visited my dad's favorite lake that fall, brought the fishing reel I'd hung by the window and tossed it gently into the water like a tribute. The breeze was crisp, the kind that makes you feel clean and raw at the same time. I stood there for a while, watching the ripples fade. There was no speech, no big cinematic moment, just stillness, just memory, just love. And then I turned around and walked back to my car, not with sadness, but with the quiet certainty that I was finally free. I sold a few of my dad's investments later that year and used the money to start something small, a nonprofit offering tech workshops to low-income high school kids. It wasn't flashy. It didn't trend anywhere, but it felt right. I named it after my dad's middle name, Thomas, because no matter how much noise my mother had made, he was always the root of who I became. Every computer we set up, every kid who sat down to learn coding, or build a website, or create something they thought was impossible before they became part of a legacy she never touched. That's the thing about real revenge. It's not fire, it's growth. It's surviving what tried to break you and building something better in its place, something lasting, something they can't steal. My home became a place for late-night movie marathons, with people I actually chose to have in my life. Friends, not family by blood, but by love. We'd cook together, dance terribly in the kitchen, talk about nothing and everything. It was messy, loud, real, and it was mine, fully, unapologetically. One night, sitting out back watching the sun melt into the horizon, I realized something simple and powerful. I didn't win because I had more money or better lawyers or stronger arguments. I won because I stopped letting them define the terms. I didn't just protect what was mine, I grew beyond it, and in doing so, I left them behind. I still keep the cease and desist letter framed in my office, not out of pettiness, out of principle. It reminds me that boundaries aren't just words, they're acts of self-respect. Every time I glance at it, I remember the version of myself who was afraid to say no, who thought family meant forever, no matter the cost. That version is gone, replaced by someone who knows better, who knows that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is burn the bridge, not out of anger, but because it's the only way to stop them from crossing back in. There's a scar across the back wall of the house, faint now, but still visible if you know where to look. It's from that night, the night they tried to turn everything to smoke and ash. I could have painted over it completely, but I didn't. I left it as a line in the story, a reminder that even in the places where they tried to destroy me, I built back stronger, better, wiser. It's not a wound. It's a mark of survival. And sometimes, when the sun hits it just right, it looks like a silver streak against the brick. Beautiful in its own way. Proof that I made it out. Story 2. Because your brother has, my father said. Your house should go to him. My mother grinned and replied, then we'll just take it another way, when I declined. My parents attempted to. The bank called me the following day. Although I was aware of my parents' partiality, I never imagined it would reach this level. It all began when I purchased my first home. It was my nothing special. It had a little lawn, 3 bedrooms, and above all, a home where I could finally relax. To make it happen, I worked really hard for years, saving every cent, forgoing nights out and vacations, and occasionally even missing meals. When I notified my parents I had closed on the property, they never provided me any financial support, co-signed my loan, or even offered words of encouragement. At best, their response was ambivalent. My mom just inquired if the guest room would be ready for their arrival, and my dad grunted something about how much labor houses require. That was it. After 2 years, I had made myself at home. Well, that was a nice life. I had struggled for steadiness, and now I could finally enjoy it. After that, my brother, I'll call him Jake, lost his job. The favorite has always been Jake. He was the golden boy growing up, anything he desired, given to him by my parents after he dropped out of college. When he crashed his first car, they paid for another school. They got him another. I had to fight for everything in the meantime. I had to put in effort to get what I wanted, and I did. Jake had 2 children after getting married young. Laura, his wife, shared his entitlement complex and incessant expectation that others would clean up their mess. They were living in a house they could hardly afford, living beyond their means. They began skipping mortgage payments after Jake lost his job, and before long, their home was in danger of going into foreclosure. My parents approached me at that point. We were having dinner at their house when my dad casually said, "Since Jake has kids and you don't, he should get your house. It makes sense." I almost choked on my food. "What?" My mom smiled. That sickly sweet smile she always used when she thought she could manipulate me. "You can always get another house, sweetheart. You're young and you don't have a family to worry about. Think of the kids." I put my fork down. "You want me to just give them my house?" Well, my dad shrugged. "Not give. We could figure something out, but they need a stable place. And since you're alone, it would be the right thing to do." I looked at them in disbelief. No, just like that. Their faces changed. My mom's smile dropped and my dad's expression hardened. My mom took a sip of her wine, then calmly said, "Then we'll just take it another way." I felt a chill run down my spine. What the hell is that supposed to mean? She just kept smiling, but my dad waved his hand dismissively. "Forget it. Just think about it." That night, I didn't get any sleep. I got a horrible feeling in my belly. And the next day, my suspicions were verified true. At approximately 10 a.m., I got a call from my bank. The woman on the other end sounded anxious. "Mr., my last name. We simply wanted to confirm some things about your mortgage refinancing application. I sat up straight. My what? She paused. We got a request this morning to refinancing your mortgage. The request was filed under your name, but there are some contradictions in the material, so we needed to verify. I shut her off. I never filed a request. Quiet. Then she cleared her throat. Well, I see. Someone did. I urged her to stop doing everything and headed straight to the bank. When I saw the paperwork, my hands started trembling. My signature has been attempted to be falsified by my parents. They utilized old paperwork of mine, stuff I had left at their house years ago, to attempt to convince the bank to transfer the mortgage into their names. They may have succeeded if the bank hadn't reported it as suspicious. I was enraged. I phoned my parents right there in the bank, and when my mom answered, I didn't even say hello. You attempted to take my house. She made no attempt to refute it. Don't be too theatrical, please. Have you gone insane? That is deception. It's against the law. Oh, calm down, I said. She said, all we wanted to do was assist. This wouldn't have been required if you had first accepted. I was furious and trembling. I'm going to report this. There was a response to it. Her tone became icy. You wouldn't treat your own family that way. Observe me. I immediately contacted a lawyer after hanging up. It was far from over. That day, I felt as though everything had fallen apart when I left the bank. My house has been attempted to be stolen by my own parents. My home and my mother's way of acting as though it didn't matter, as if I were the irrational one. It infuriated me. This was not something I was going to overlook. The following morning, I had a meeting with my lawyer. He was an elderly man. No bullshit. And he raised his eyebrows when I gave him the bank paperwork. He responded, this is serious. This might land them in prison. Excellent. I gave it all to him. Records from the bank, the fictitious documents, and even a statement from the loan officer who discovered the crime. Despite my lawyer's assurances that we had a strong case, I felt unwell. My family was this. I never imagined that I would have to sue my own parents, but in the end, they gave me no other option. My phone started exploding later that evening. My mother was the first. I disregarded her. Then my father. Next, my brother. When my dad phoned for the third time, I finally picked up. Why on earth are you doing this? He let out a bark. No! Hi there. No pretension. What am I doing? My house was stolen by you. He sneered. It's a powerful term. It's the appropriate term. He gave a sharp exhale. Listen, there's no need for this to continue. We'll forget about it altogether if you stop this legal bullshit. I gave a sour laugh. Don't remember it ever occurred. Do you honestly think I'm going to ignore this? He said. You're overreacting. Your family is us. Family members support one another. I tightened my jaw. Fraud is not committed by family. After a brief period of silence, his tone became menacing. Don't count on our support if you take this to court. You will be permanently severing your relationship with this family. To calm myself, I had to inhale deeply. When you attempted to take from me, I believe you already accomplished that, I said. I then hung up. The next attack, I thought that was the end of it, that they'd realized they'd messed up and back off. However, I ought to have known better. My house was egged when I woke up the following morning. Not a couple of splashes. The yolk and shells were all over my car, garage, and front door. I was certain who had done it. When I looked at my security cameras, I saw Jake and his wife grinning and laughing, with my mother watching from right next to them. I stood there, shaking with rage. This was more than petty retaliation. It was war. I saved the video, made a report, and called the police. Although they told me there wasn't much they could do, the officers were understanding. One of them described it as vandalism at best. However, you could sue them in small claims court if you have security footage. I told them I gave it some thought. Then, less than 2 hours later, my house lost power. I looked at the breakers. Nothing was imprisoned. Perplexed. When I went outside, I was horrified by what I saw. My electrical panel's lock was broken. The switch had been flipped off manually. The electric company confirmed that someone had tampered with it when I called them, and I was well aware of the perpetrator. The situation with my parents has gotten worse. They were no longer only attempting to coerce me into selling the house. They were attempting to ruin my life, and I had had enough. The lawyer's surprise. Furious, I drove directly to my lawyer's office. I told him everything: the threats, the power sabotage, and the vandalism. He nodded and listened intently before reclined in his chair. I was going to wait to tell you this, but now seems like a good time, he added softly. I squinted. Tell me what? A folder he slid across the desk. We looked into your parents' backgrounds. As we are taking legal action, this is standard process. My heart stopped as I opened the folder. A record was within, a criminal record for fraud. What? What is this? My voice sounded raspy. My lawyer responded coldly. Your folks have done this before. In the 1990s, your father was arrested for tax evasion. What about your mother? She was discovered opening credit cards under a false identity. I was dumbfounded when I looked at him. My whole life, I had seen my parents a harsh, controlling, and unjust. But, he said, criminals. Years have passed since then. They received probation and penalties. However, considering what they just attempted to do with your mortgage, there is a pattern there. The earth seemed to have been torn out from under me. My house was no longer the only issue. Attempting to perform the biggest con of their life on their own kid. My parents were con artists. I balled my fists up. They were going to get into a fight if they wanted one, a larger scheme and a concealed debt. I sat looking at my parents' criminal histories in my lawyer's office. My thoughts were racing. My house was no longer the only issue. There was more to this. I bent over. Could they get into problems again if they have this history? I mean, my lawyer stroked his chin in terms of money. That's an excellent query. It wouldn't hurt to look a bit further if they are desperate enough to attempt to steal your house. After I gave my consent, we began searching through public data. We obtained answers in 2 days after my lawyer asked a financial detective he knew for a favor. And my stomach dropped when I heard their responses. My parents were drowning in debt. Over the years, they had taken out several debts: credit cards, personal loans, home equity loans, and even other people's names. By moving funds around and utilizing fresh loans to pay off previous ones, they have been engaging in a long-term scam. However, everything had finally caught up with them. The worst portion was then revealed to me. On one of their debts, my name appeared. What on earth is this? I whispered as I gazed at the paper. Although it was an old debt that I had never taken out, I signed it. A chilly insight swept over me. For years, my parents had been exploiting my identity, the larger treachery and the fraudulent loan. I wanted answers when I phoned the bank that provided the loan. They were reluctant to speak at first, but they placed me on wait when I brought up fraud. A manager answered the phone 15 minutes later. We are able to verify, sir, that the loan was obtained in your name. About 6 years ago, the application was personally processed in a nearby bank. 6 years ago, I almost dropped the phone. 6 years ago, I didn't sign anything. I shook my head. I worked 3 jobs to save money for my house 6 years ago while still living in my small apartment. I hardly had enough credit to obtain a personal loan, much less a car loan. Could you please email the materials to me? I inquired. When I received them in my email an hour later, my name, social security number, phony signature, and cosigner were all there. Mom, I was physically ill. She had entered a bank and taken out money in my name while posing as me. Before I even realized what I had, she had stolen from me, and now my brother was becoming involved in that debt. I received a text just when I thought things couldn't get much worse. It was from an unknown number. Hey, I believe we should speak. On the 5th, meet me at the restaurant. It has to do with Mom and Dad. Don't tell them, please. I scowled with intense discomfort. Still, I went. My brother Jake was sitting in a booth looking worn out when I entered. This was strange. He didn't initiate contact. He never made a private request of me. My parents were always involved, as if he were their puppet. I moved to the seat on the other side of him. Talk. Jake massaged his face and moaned. I had no idea that they really did it. I squinted. What did you do? He paused, then leaned forward. A few years back, they informed me that they were considering applying for a loan in your name. I didn't believe they would follow through. I felt sick to my stomach. You knew then? He took a deep gulp. It didn't seem real to me. I gave a disgusted shake of my head. And you didn't mind at all. Jake's jaw tightened. You didn't give me any money. I gave a sour laugh. No, but you tried to seize my house with no trouble at all? He glanced at the table below. I had no other option. I sneered. Jake, everyone has an option. Then he raised his head to face me, and I noticed something new in his eyes. Fear. He said, "They're deeper than you think." I crossed my arms. Describe. Jake let out a slow breath. Some people owe money to mom and dad. I scowled. Who are they? He paused. Sharks for loans? Their true motivation for wanting my house. Everything fell into place. Their desire to assist Jake was not the only reason they attempted to seize my residence. They were running out of time, so they needed my residence. I tightened my jaw. How much do they owe? Jake paused. A lot. At least $100,000. Perhaps more. Although I am not fully informed, I am aware that they obtained loans from individuals who dislike having to wait for repayment. I reclined. My heart is racing. In order to pay off the debt they had accrued, my own parents were prepared to steal from their own son, and now they were in serious danger if they couldn't get the money. Jake gave me a direct look. Their alternatives are dwindling. They attempted to create a refinancing for that reason. They're pressing so hard because of this. I gripped the table's edge as I sat there. I had to decide what to do. I could pursue legal action, show them for the scammers they were, and see them fail. Or I might hurt them with this information. My next course of action was to take out my phone, go to my call history, and tap on my lawyer's number. Jake's gaze expanded. What are you doing, Wade? I smiled darkly at him. I'm going to make this whole thing better. And they wouldn't anticipate it this time. The altercation. A unique family gathering. Outside my parents' house, I sat in my car. My thoughts are racing. It was this. Everything I had informed my lawyer. The loan sharks, the damage, the fraudulent loan, and the scam. And I had set a trap with his suggestion. I was not going to face my parents by myself. As I stepped out of the car, I glanced at my phone. I got a text from my attorney. We're prepared. Simply utter the word. I inhaled deeply before rapping on the door. My mother responded with her typical phony, sugary smile. Oh, dear, have you regained consciousness at last? My brother and father were already waiting in the living room as I shoved past her. Jake shifted in his seat, looking uncomfortable. In contrast, my dad reclined back as if he owned the area, crossed arms, looking at me as if I were a bother. My father remarked, "You have a lot of nerve coming here." I gave a sour laugh. "I'm brave. My house was stolen by you. You have been deceiving me all my life, and you falsified my name on a loan." Mom's smile remained unwavering. "Honey, you're acting theatrical once more. We were fair. Quit talking." For the first time, I noticed a glimmer of genuine concern in her eyes, and my voice was chilly. Dad laughed. "Be mindful of your tone. Worse still, your parents are aware of your illicit activity." I took my phone from my pocket and raised it. I have evidence, too. The loan in my name, the fraudulent refinancing, your history of fraud, everything is recorded. I even learned how much money you owe. Dad's expression wavered, but he said nothing. Mom laughed nervously. "We needed the money, honey. You just took it from me then?" I lost my temper. Jake cleared his throat. "They did more than simply steal from you." Mom made a quick turn. "Jake, quit talking." However, it was too late. I gave him a look. "What do you mean?" He took a deep gulp. "They also took out loans in the names of my children." I could feel my face getting thinner. "Your children?" "They are young children, Jake." "No. Social Security, of course. Numbers never get old. Years ago, they used their names to create accounts. For a moment, they already have thousands of dollars in debt." The room fell silent. After that, I went back to my parents. "Your own grandkids were the victims of your theft." Mom had lost her phony grin. She glanced at me with cold calculation. "We took the necessary action. At last, Dad's voice was flat. What will we use to repay it?" I let out a bark. "You owe more than $100,000 to loan sharks. You've run out of assets. Your residence has very little value. You mortgaged it to hell after that. You were in danger of drowning." Dad's jaw tightened, but he was at a loss for words. I inhaled deeply. "Are you even interested in me? What about Jake, regarding his children?" Mom straightened up and raised her chin. "We do, of course. However, family looks out for one another. All we're asking is that. You were given life by us. You were reared by us. We are aware, I interrupted. We weren't raised by you. You took advantage of us. You viewed us as lifelines and tools. We were never loved by you. We could do something for you that you loved. Something nasty twisted Mom's face. You ungrateful little. I flipped my phone over and hit the record button. Her tone. Then we'll simply approach it in a different manner. Her eyes widened. I had reached out to my lawyer, who had instructed me to document everything. His cheeks was flushed with anger. You're little. I took a step back. Give it a try. The door then swung open as I gestured toward it. Along with a man in a suit, 2 uniformed police officers intervened. An investigator from the fraud section of the bank. Mom became pale. Hold on. No. We can discuss this. Dad tried to get away already, but the cops stopped him. The full name of Dad. Mom's full name. You've been arrested for financial exploitation, fraud, and identity theft. Mom's eyes were wide and frantic as she turned to face me. You wouldn't treat your own mother in this manner. I looked at her with no emotion. You did it to yourself. Mom cried out and begged as the cops cuffed them. Dad simply stopped talking. The jaw tightened. When they eventually left the house, neither of them gave Jake a glance. The silence in the home seemed uncanny. Jake only sat with trembling hands. I let out a sigh. Are you all right? He chuckled bitterly. No, not at all, I don't. After a long moment of stillness, he mumbled, So what now? The aftermath. With the bank's fraud department involved, years of financial crime heaped against them, and documented proof, the case proceeded swiftly. My parents were out of the running. Naturally, they made an effort to resist it. They held me responsible. Jake was held responsible. They even attempted to accuse the bank of misinterpreting their goals. It didn't work. Both parents were sentenced to years in jail. The parts were left for Jake to pick up. To get his children's names removed from the fake debt, he had to battle. However, he was able to handle the case against our parents. I got my name clear too. What about the house? I still own it. However, since my parents' imprisonment, I haven't spoken to them. Despite our civility, Jake and I will never be close. There's too much history, too much damage. A family that never existed. I've always believed that family should have some significance, that your parents would always be there for you. However, mine never did. I was not considered a son by them. I was an investment to them, and they attempted to ruin me when I refused to be exploited. I'm glad I turned them in. Not for a second. In actuality, they were never truly my parents, not in any significant way. Story 3. When I was 18, my parents expelled me. We sold our house, therefore we're moving in with you, they announced over the phone years later. When I declined, my mom laughed and said, Then we'll simply show up. When they saw who was opening the door, they froze when they arrived the following day with their baggage. My parents expelled me when I was 18. No transition period, no warning. A simple blunt. Now you're an adult. It's time to look for yourself. I had nowhere to go, no funds, and no automobile. They had made too much money for me to receive financial assistance. So college was out of the question, but they certainly weren't willing to help. When my dad threw my bags on the front yard, my mother simply grinned as if I should be thankful for this life lesson. So I chopped and surfed. When I had 1, 2, or occasionally 3 jobs, I slept in my car. It took me a while to get up, in the manner they said they did, but I had no safety net, unlike them. After years of hardship, I finally succeeded. I had a good career, a great home, and a life I was happy with. Thanks to them, no. Then I unexpectedly received a call. My mother's voice was sickly sweet. Hello, sweetheart. I recently sold the house with your father. You and I are moving in together. It nearly made me chuckle. No, you're not. Flatly, I replied. She gave a little patronizing laugh. Come on, please. Tomorrow we'll be there. There's plenty of room for you. I ended the call. When I returned home from work the following day, they were indeed waiting for me with their bags on my front porch. They weren't alone, though. It wasn't me who welcomed them when the door opened. It was my lawyer. Let's go back a bit, the intervening years. After my parents ejected me, I disconnected from them, but not out of spite. I was perfectly entitled. However, they made it apparent that I was only a burden to them. When I did try to remain in touch, My mom seemed like she was doing me a favor just by speaking to me. Are you still having trouble? You definitely need to improve your money management skills. Sipping her expensive coffee in the house I was not permitted to enter, she would say. I was foregoing meals in the meantime in order to pay my rent. They seemed unconcerned, so I stopped calling. Only after I began to do well did they suddenly realize I was there. At first, there were only cordial little check-ins. Out of the blue, my dad would text me, "How are things going? We miss you." Then my mother began phoning. "I only wanted to listen to your voice, my love. Family is vital, you know." Then the true cause of their home sale was revealed. My father had been laid off. For years, they had lived far over their means. They disregarded the mounting debt because they believed they would have plenty of time to pay it off. However, they didn't. They had a straightforward retirement plan. Their arrival, me. As if I owed them something, they were waiting on my porch, ready to stroll inside my house. My mother's face sank as my lawyer answered the door. My father blinked. "Who is this?" "My lawyer," I said. My mother chuckled as if this were a joke. "Why would you require legal counsel? To ensure that you are aware of the legal ramifications of trespassing?" I crossed my arms. Their faces became white. I took a step forward. "This is not your home. This is not a place for you, and I'll file charges if you attempt to force your way inside." My mother's eyes were no longer laughing, but her grin remained fixed. She responded, her voice faltering. "You wouldn't. Give me a try." In an attempt to appear reasonable, my dad intervened. "Son, let's speak about this indoors. We are related." I gave a head shake. "No. A family doesn't abandon their child and then return years later thinking to get away with it." My mother's face contorted. "You were reared by us. We gave you everything." I laughed more loudly. "I was thrown aside like garbage by you. You didn't give a damn if I went hungry, if I had a place to sleep, if I lived or died. You have no right to return at this time and behave as though you are deserving of anything from me." She started to protest, but my lawyer interrupted. "According to the documentation I have here, you are not allowed to speak with or approach my client ever again. Legal action will be taken if you do." She looked to me, despair seeping into her gaze. "Is this what you're doing to your own parents?" I met her eyes. "I was the first who did it to me." I then slammed the door in their faces. Unresolved matters. After a week, there were 2. I believed that I was free. After then, I received a letter in the mail. "My mother gave it to me because you disregarded your obligation as our son. Our only option is to file a lawsuit. We feel we have a right to live in the house, hence we will be challenging its ownership. If you do not cooperate, we will be obliged to escalate issues." I sat with my fingers whitened from holding the letter so tightly. Contest who owns my house. They were crazy. I immediately phoned my attorney. He let out a sigh, anticipating this. He stated that they had no legal claim. However, it won't stop them from ruining your life. He was correct. The storm starts. They began by disseminating false information. They referred to friends and relatives, even a few of my colleagues. He has left us. My aunt heard my mom's tears. With what's left over, we're staying in a budget hotel. He won't even pick up when we phone him. How could he have such a cold heart? Suddenly, I was the villain. I received hateful texts from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. How could you be so cruel to your own parents? You treat them like trash, even though they reared you. You don't deserve a family, therefore I pray you never have any. I choose to disregard them. My supervisor then summoned me to his office. I received a strange voicemail. Playing it on the speaker, he said. It was my mother's voice. "I would want to inform you about the type of individual you have on staff. My son is a nasty person. He left his parents without a place to live, following whatever we did for him. How can you trust him if he can forsake his own flesh and blood?" My supervisor looked at me, not upset, simply exhausted. "Your private life is unimportant to me. Tell your family, however, to keep me out of it." I tightened my jaw. "I'll handle it." However, I was unaware of the severity of the impending escalation. My doorbell rang a couple of evenings later. I looked through the peephole. My parents were smugly standing there. There was a policeman behind them. I felt sick to my stomach. I pulled the door open. The officer gave a courteous nod. "Respected sir, according to these 2, you have illegally evicted them from this house, even though they are the rightful owners." I gave a little sour laugh. They're telling lies. My father put on his most hurt look. We don't have a house or money. All we need is somewhere to stay. My mother brushed away imaginary tears, officer. Even our own son is off limits to him. I looked over to the cop. They didn't interact with me until they went bankrupt, and they expelled me when I was 18. I live here. The cop let out a sigh. Do you have ownership documentation? I gave a nod. Wait a minute. Reaching inside my filing cabinet, I took out the deed and gave it to him. After giving it a quick inspection, he turned to face my parents. According to this document, he is the only owner. Legally, you have no claim to this land. My mom let out a gasp as if she were the victim. But we're his parents. We have nowhere to go. He touched his forehead, the officer said. That's not how the law operates, ma'am. My dad's expression hardened. He regarded me as if I were dirt beneath his feet. Will you actually allow us to suffer? I looked him in the eye. As if you permitted my suffering. Quiet. The cop cleared his throat. You two must go. You will be trespassing if you return here. Anger distorted my mother's face. You're a little ungrateful. The cop held out a hand. That's sufficient. Leave. There was nothing they could do. They left. However, I knew this was not the end. And I was correct. Breaking point. When I returned home a week later, my front door was ajar. I felt sick to my stomach. I entered with caution. The living room was a complete mess. Cushions tore open, drawers pulled out. My television was broken on the ground. Then it shuffled from the kitchen, and I heard it. I snatched up the closest object I could find, an iron fireplace poker, and slipped ahead. Inside, my parents were going through my refrigerator as if they were the owners. I felt a surge of rage. Why on earth are you doing this? My mom whirled around with a container of leftovers in her hand. We were hungry. I gestured toward the mess. And this? My dad folded his arms. We were reclaiming our property. I became enraged. I took my phone out. Before I call the police, you have 10 seconds to get out. My mom's eyes got big. You wouldn't. I pressed the dial. She let the container fall. My father took hold of her arm. Come on. However, my mother leaned in close and said in a low, poisonous voice before they departed, "This is something you'll regret." Then they vanished. I stared at the wreckage, heart pumping, and I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. After they broke into my residence, I filed a police report. The police weren't exactly hopeful. Since they're your parents, the court might not take it as seriously. One of them stated with a sigh, "But breaking and entering is still a felony. We'll keep it on record. Not exactly comfortable." I changed my locks, got security cameras installed, took every precaution I could think of. But deep down, I knew my folks weren't done. The second breaking, 2 weeks later, I got a motion alert on my phone while I was at work. I examined the security stream and my gut constricted. My folks were outside again. Only this time, they weren't alone. They had a locksmith. I could scarcely process what I was witnessing. My mother was chatting to the guy, presumably giving him some sob story as my dad stood there with his arms folded. My hands shook from the speed at which I called the police. I then used the security system's two-way speaker and turned up the volume on my phone. It's private property. You will be arrested if you do not leave now. The locksmith leaped. Like it was nothing, my mother waved him away. Well, don't pay attention to him. This is our home. We were shut out by him. The man paused. Then my father lost it. We're paying you, aren't we, dear Job? The cop vehicle pulled up before I could finish speaking. The locksmith took a step back. Raise your hands. They informed me they owned the house, I swear. My parents were already in the path of the police. I saw them being placed in handcuffs on my front lawn. My mother screamed as if she were being killed. This is absurd. His parents are us. We are entitled to certain rights. The cop seemed unconcerned. Not when you're breaking the law. Suddenly, they were dragged away. I let out a breath. They could finally leave me alone now. The struggle in court. I ought to have been more aware. I received a letter from a lawyer 2 days later. I was being sued by my parents. The assertion? A lawful eviction. In fact, they attempted to claim that they automatically had the right to live in my house because they were my parents. It was crazy. My own lawyer almost laughed when I brought the letter to him directly. He claimed that even though they have no case, they are still attempting to take you to court in the hopes that you will give in and make a settlement. No way. We got into a fight. They mentioned all the favors they had done for me as a child. He was reared by us. In court, my mother screamed, We covered him tuition, clothes, and meals. We owe him. Their attorney, likely ashamed to be present, attempted to frame it as a family dispute. However, my attorney quickly put an end to that. When the defendant was 18, the plaintiff threw them out with nothing. No resources, no house, no help. Their contribution to his present house has been $0. The purpose of this baseless action is to demand money from a son they left behind. It was cruel. The court ultimately dismissed the lawsuit. My parents, however, weren't finished. The huge lie. Weeks went by. Perhaps, I reasoned, they had finally given up. Then I was summoned back to my boss's office. He had an inscrutable face. Regarding you, I received another call. I tensed up. My folks. He gave a nod. They're not simply phoning me this time, though. My stomach turned over. What are you saying? Inside, he gave me a folder. Several workers received anonymous information about you stating that you are a violent and aggressive person who was arrested for domestic abuse, according to HR complaints from people I worked with. I blinked. What? My supervisor leaned forward. I investigated it personally, and it's clear that none of it is accurate. However, someone is making a concerted effort to get you dismissed. My folks. It must have been. I tightened my jaw. Can I address these grievances? He gave a nod. We'll look into it. However, I wanted to alert you. Whoever is responsible, their goal is to ruin you. My entire career was being ruined by my own parents. It dawned on me then that they wanted more than just my house. They want to rob me of everything. Enough is enough. That evening, I decided something. I wasn't going to merely defend myself. I was going to call it quits. I had finished the last combat. My parents had been trying to force their way back into my life for months, not with affection or regret, but with deceit, litigation, and manipulation. After breaking into my house and attempting to take my job, they were now defaming me as if I were a monster. Even after they expelled me, I had been terrified of them my entire life. I still harbored a desire for their acceptance. But standing there, gazing at those fake HR complaints, something broke inside of me. They weren't simply lousy parents. They posed a threat, and I was going to finally put a stop to this. Setting the stage, I was well aware of their whereabouts. After doing some research, I discovered that they weren't truly homeless, despite their claims that they were living in a hotel, barely making ends meet, and using what little money they had to pursue their lawsuit against me. Horrible. I could have let them rot in their own mess and ignored them. Now, though, I had to turn them around. Thus, I texted them. We must speak. On the 9th, meet me at the old restaurant. An hour. Mom, do you care now? Me? Show up or I'll file charges for the break-in. I was aware that they would seize the opportunity to influence me face to face. And I was correct. The confrontation. When I got there, the diner was almost deserted. Just an old couple in the corner and a waitress too weary to care. My folks had already arrived and were seated in a booth. I approached them and took the seat across from them. They had a terrible appearance. My mother's hair looked disheveled. She seemed to be waiting for someone to intervene and save her, as evidenced by her darting gaze. My dad, who used to be so tall and domineering, now appeared small and hollowed out by his own greed. However, I felt no sympathy, just fury. All right, I responded in a chilly tone. Let's finish this up, my mother sneered. You want to chat now then? Following everything that you have done to us? I genuinely laughed. What I did, my house was broken into by you. You attempted to fire me. I was sued by you. And I'm the bad guy somehow. Her eyes narrowed. You left your family behind. What else were we expected to do? I bent over. You were meant to have children. Quiet. Then my father shifted uneasily. He had always been the more realistic one, but now he looked like a man trapped. He murmured, You've made your point. All we need is a little assistance. I gave a quick breath. I'm not your retirement plan, that's for sure. I was thrown away by you. You lived luxuriously while you left me to struggle. You come crawling back now that you have no other alternatives. My mom's face contorted. It's unfair. We gave it our all. No, you didn't. I gave the words time to register. You could have helped me while I was struggling. You may have checked in or phoned. But until you were left with no other option, You didn't because you didn't care. I gave a head shake. You're not in love with me. You simply adore the things I can do for you. The eyes of my mother blazed. You're a little ungrateful. My mother halted and lowered her voice as the waitress passed, but the malice remained. After all that we gave up for you, how much did we spend on your upbringing? The work, the money, the time? I tightened my jaw. Parents are expected to do that. My father sighed. The past is the past, you see. The done is the done. Can't we just get on with it? I let out a calm, measured breath. Do you wish to proceed? Both of them nodded rapidly. Then I said, this is what's going to happen. First, you immediately drop the lawsuit. I've got enough proof to refute Sue already, and I'll take you to court if you continue to push this. My dad held out a hand as my mom sneered. All right. Second, I went on, quit bothering me at work. Quit spreading false information about me. I'll make sure that everyone is aware of your true identity if I hear even one more rumor. My dad rubbed his temples and moaned. Is that all? I said softly as I leaned in. No third. You will always be absent from my life. My mother's jaw dropped. That's not what you mean. I looked directly into her eyes. Yes, I do. She began to shake her head. You can't simply stop talking to us. We are your parents. I had an inside sensation. Delicate. Even after all these years, there was a persistent, profound anxiety that had held me to them. Then, it was gone at last. I just said, I don't know anything about you. No more. My father grabbed my mother's wrist as she began to fight. He was aware I wasn't bluffing, and he knew it. And he appeared scared of me for the first time in my life. The fallout. The pestering ceased, and they did dismiss the case. On everything, I blocked them. Disregarded their pitiful attempts to get in touch. I felt free for the first time in years. Some of my family members sided with them and accused me of being callous. I didn't give a damn. Those who were important. My selected relatives and friends were aware of the reality. And it was sufficient. Reflection. Family, it has been said, is everything. That you should always look after them, no matter what. Family is more than simply blood, though. It's the one who arrives when you need them. It's the one who shows you kindness, love, and respect. Additionally, you don't have to keep the door open if someone shows that they don't deserve to be in your life. Because sometimes letting them go is the only way to really move forward.